So that's part one of our discussion. Part two is a little bit different. We're going to be talking about a new game coming out in August, for that matter, called Concord. So Concord, for those of you who haven't been keeping up with, say, PlayStation, particular PlayStation news, it is launching on Steam day one as well. Concord is a Sony first-party studio game. So with that brings it a lot of expectations. So Sony first-party studio games will be, when you think of that, Ghosts of Tsushima coming to mind, Horizon Zero Dawn might be another one, God of War, Ratchet and Clank, and the upcoming Astro Bot as well, just to name a few. There's plenty more I could talk about, but those are the ones that come to mind. Very high quality games. So when this game was first teased, 2 years ago, I believe now, brand new studio called Firewalk, made up of ex-Bungie devs and other developers who've worked on Apex Legends and Overwatch. People were really, really excited that Sony might be making their first real first-person shooter, not since the days of Killzone or Resistance. So people were pumped up, very excited. And then we got the gameplay reveal at the recent showcase, and it didn't go down too well. What a lot of people were expecting turned out to be only half the fact. It was a shooter, but it was a 5v5 hero shooter. Worse still, it was a live service game. So live service games have certainly got a bad rap in the last few years, and rightly so. There's been nothing but disaster after disaster in the genre. When this game started development, maybe 5-6 years ago, who knows, maybe even 7, it was a different time period. Overwatch was still king. Apex Legends was really probably just coming out at the moment, and the word live service didn't really have that negative aspect to it as it does now. But before we cast judgment, and a lot of people already have, a lot of outlets have got their hands on a preview of the game. So we thought we'd check out a couple of them, as well as go over a little bit of information and a few concerns as well. So Stella Chung over at IGN got to experience the game, 2 hours in a preview build. And she starts off by saying, honestly, she thought it was going to be a story-driven first-person shooter via a Sony first-party studio, which is fair, like we all did. Now, before we do continue, it is $60, so it isn't free to play. It is going to be $60 to buy, and that's $60 AUD. There is a premium edition world that goes for 95 AUD, at least on Steam anyway. So for PlayStation, it might be probably a little bit more. And so it isn't free to play. It is buy once and you get to keep it. So why that's important is that each season will be free. So you won't have to pay for additional seasons. So that's really good. You purchase the game, you get all future updates. There are going to be microtransactions, but they are cosmetic only. Developers have come out and saying that they will not affect gameplay. But depending on your stance of cosmetic only microtransactions and where you fall in that line, personally, as someone who plays a lot of Persona games, I've spent quite a lot of money on different outfits for the characters. But that's a single player game, so I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. With live service games and the selling of cosmetics, it does affect gameplay because people become quite attached to their characters. So you are manipulating people into buying cosmetics. So continuing down with Stella's article. Now, she did enjoy the preview, but there are some concerns that she felt for the longevity of Concord and what it ultimately has to offer in the gaming space. So the meat and potatoes are very good. You get to choose, there are 2 teams, 5v5. Now during the build, she was able to play 3 of the total 6 modes. There are 6 modes launching with Concord, as well as 16 heroes. Now she played Trophy Hunt, Cargo Run, and Clash Point. Trophy Hunt was the only one that featured respawns in the match and was basically kill confirmed team deathmatch. So that's a very interesting point to note, that the other 2 modes that she played is that when you died, you basically just had to sort of spectate, which can go either way. If this were a free-to-play game, you'd probably be okay. You'd be all right with that. As a new player, and particularly as a casual player, if you're a casual player getting into this 5v5, you're a Sony fan, you haven't touched Overwatch, you've never played Apex Legends before, and you get into this game for the first time, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed when you get into a match and then you get blasted by a PC player, since it is crossplay enabled on day one, and you're just having to sit there and watch. So I personally find that quite dull. I just can't do that. Playing PvP in Division 2 was bad enough. Just PvP games in general, particularly 5v5 hero shooters, just not my jam. So Stella goes on to state that the single life modes were tough to warm up to, as we've just said, while still getting to know the game, as failure obviously means you're out for action for a bit. And while Concord is a fairly straightforward first-person shooter, I have a core criticism a mere 2 months from its launch, August 23. In the build I played, the movement felt extremely floaty and required a bit of time to get used to. Now, this is exacerbated by the fact that each free runner, which is what the characters are called in-game, possesses a unique set of movement and skills that they bring to the team. So each time you swap into as a new character, you're attempting to learn and configure your brain to how they work. So naturally, this gets a little bit disorientating. She goes on to say that the movement feels heavily reminiscent of Destiny and Halo. Now, Destiny's movement is very floaty. You'll jump or you'll dodge, and because it's taking place essentially in space, you sort of float for a little bit and you're shooting, but not too much. It's just enough to feel real without you essentially feeling like a balloon. Stella's saying, however, that in Concord, the featherlight jumps and hang time really didn't match up with the amount of fast-paced fights that could occur at any time in these matches. Essentially saying that you're putting a target on your back if you jump up. You're just going to float there and people can just absolutely obliterate you. Going down in the article a little bit further down, the problem with Concord, at least in the preview version, is that it takes pieces from games like Halo and Destiny and mixes them together in a formula that doesn't quite come together for me as of yet. Concord actually utilizes the same type of dodge animation from Destiny that pulls you out into third person. Now, while I like this element in Destiny, in Concord it doesn't quite work because there's a brief but noticeable delay between your input of the dodge and the actual deployment. Not the best sign here, I have to admit. So one thing that really, really bugs me in playing Souls-likes in particular, or any game, but particularly Souls-likes, and you see it a lot in the AAA and the AA space, my apologies, is that sort of dodge. You press the dodge button and there's a clear delay. You can't sync your brain up, and that's in a single player Souls-like. So I can't imagine what it's going to be like in a competitive 5v5 shooter. So Sony has gone on to say that there'll be 12 maps at launch. So perhaps some of these game modes will feel better paced and optimized on than others. But the way things stand currently, most maps feel oddly misshapen. So another big issue for Concord, at least in this preview build, and for Stellar at IGN so far, is that the maps are feeling a bit samey. So you're getting a lot of maps. They're feeling a lot copy and pasted. Now, Concord touts its competitive nature and fast-paced fights. I love all that, but found that the competitiveness risks being unwelcoming to new players attempting to learn the game because most of the game modes are single-lifed focused. Again, that's a big issue. You want to attract some new people to the game. You want to get them involved in this 5v5 shooter, and there's a high skill ceiling. Where do you find that balance? Where do you find the balance between offering a challenging experience for veterans of the genre, for people who have played Overwatch before or any other 5v5 shooter game, and how do you draw people in? And it's going to be very tricky, and I hope Firewall can do it. They've got some very good pedigree involved in the development team, but we will have to wait and see for that. Now, one last point of note from Stella's little article is that there was some overpowered characters, which naturally there's going to be. Now that is going to cause balancing issues, particularly if one character is infinitely more powerful than the others. That one's going to be chosen a lot, and it's going to really just turn the battles around, which can be good. But if you walk into a match and there's just that one overpowered character there, and you're not really, your head isn't in the fight, isn't it? You've already lost. One of the other big criticisms is that because this is a cross-play game at launch, is that most casual players' experience and general approachability are going to be marred by the auto-aim that is seen on consoles. Now, when you're playing a first-person shooter with keyboard and mouse, naturally you've got a big advantage. You can do these fast-paced movements. You can't really do that on console. So Stella did say that a lot of the characters she played at, the auto aim is heavy, and she had to sort of rip the toggle away just to sort of aim it where she wanted it to go. Now, when you're playing, say, 5 PlayStation players going up against 5 PC players, there's only going to end one way. Now, Eurogamer also had an article. They got a hands on a preview build. This is by Chris Taspel. Chris said that Concord is good, but the bad news is he can't figure out why, at least just yet. From a couple of hours of playing it, and the actual way in which it is good might be a thing that gets in its way of its own success. Basically translated is that, yeah, it feels good, but I can't tell you why. Chris also goes on to say that it's a combination of a lot of other multiplayer games. Says it feels less like Overwatch and more like Crucible from Destiny. Now, Firewalk's, again, development team comes from Bungie for one. There's also the expertise from developers from Overwatch, yes, Halo, Call of Duty, and Apex Legends. So there's a lot of development, a lot of developers there have a lot of experience with this type of game. So it's going to be very interesting where this game's going to go, how it's going to succeed, how it's going to keep people around. I just don't know. I don't know. It being a live service is probably going to be its biggest detriment, really. If this was just a Sony first-party game, it would be hands down probably one of the games of the year. You know you're getting quality with a Sony first-party title. Now, this is a Sony first-party title, but having that live service attached is not going to do it any favors. And unfortunately, with the gameplay reveal showing it to be more like discount Guardians of the Galaxy, when people are tired of that quippy dialogue, it's already started off on the wrong foot. Now, over at VGC, one of the developers did have a few more things to say. Now, as we've said, there's 16 characters, 12 maps, and 6 modes at launch. It's all included when you buy the game. Seasonally will provide new maps, new modes, and new characters alongside their unfolding story. So that is one really big thing to point out. This is going to have a story. So it's going to put the story front and center, and the live action activeness is going to take a passenger seat. However, at the end of the day, it's still a live service. There are purely cosmetic pieces that you can choose to further customize the look of your character, and those you can purchase. They do not affect gameplay, but they kind of do. We believe so strongly that the full experience should be available to all other players. Concord will cost $40 USD or £35 at release. The debut title from PlayStation's Firewalk Studios will be released for PS5 and PC on August 23. Now, you can actually sign up to the beta right now if you want to. It's available on Steam and on PS5. Just an article highlighting that. You can go through the channels. It will all launch on August 23. So yeah, if you are looking to check it out first, you can try and sign up for the beta. Having a quick look over at the subreddit, it's not looking particularly populated. Granted, the game hasn't launched yet, but you usually find that there's a lot of hype around games. So there are only 489 members in the subreddit at the moment, with a lot of people just sort of hyping up these recent previews and new gameplay. So subreddits aren't anything to judge the population of things by. Suicide Squad has quite a high population, and that game is objectively terrible. But it is interesting to see that this is a Sony first-party studio title, and it's not getting the sort of fanfare you would expect. One last interesting little thing to note about Concord is that there is a deluxe edition now, as you can see here, $95. But, and this is how we're going to finish this little section off, this little video off, is that you get this game 72 hours early. So people who can't afford the $95, they just get the standard edition. You get the game late. This is scummy for a lot of reasons. It doesn't matter what game it is. It can be a single player game. It can be a multiplayer game. It's less abhorrent in a single player game. But in a multiplayer game, one of the big issues is that, particularly in a competitive game, you're going to get a clear advantage. You're going to have time to work out the favorite heroes, your favorite characters, to learn the maps, to experience a lot, if not all the game, at least on release. So when other players finally jump in, they're just going to get steamrolled. And as Stella Chung said from her IGN preview, if there's already going to be issues with new players coming in because of the high skill ceiling or the single life matches, and then you have a whole group of players who've purchased the deluxe edition and have that 72 hours free time with it essentially, well, how's that going to feel for a new player coming in and they just can't do anything? So how is matchmaking going to work? And Firewalk haven't said anything about that. Is it going to be skill-based? Are you going to be set up with randoms? Who knows? But this is a scummy practice. It has to stop. It won't stop because people still do it. But as we can see here, the Digital Deluxe Edition with the 72 hours access comes out on August 20th. What else? And I want you to tell me, what else comes out on August 20th? Well, if you're looking at the screen, you probably realize, but it's Black Myth Wukong. Why? Sorry, I have to get some water for this. Now Black Myth Wukong is not a Sony first party title. It is, however, releasing on PlayStation and Steam on day one, and it will not be releasing on Xbox for the foreseeable future. It will be releasing on Xbox, but there's no date set. So here's a brand new 5v5 hero shooter that's coming out. It's already got some mixed receptions from, media outlets and from fans or potential fans. It's coming out on the very day that Black Myth Wukong launches, arguably one of the most anticipated games of the last 2 years that has already received so much positive preview from any media outlet on the same day. Enough said. Now, one thing you could argue is that there are two very different audiences, 5v5 hero shooter versus a action combat, Souls-like, RPG fan base. But if you're someone who is looking for a new game to play, say a casual gamer who doesn't keep up with the news, and you're like, oh, I've got a PlayStation or I have a PC, I want to check out one of these two games. Do I go with Concord or do I go with Black Myth Wukong? Chances are they're going to go with Black Myth Wukong. So where does that leave Concord and its longevity? Where does that leave it for its start? And this is, Black Myth Wukong is launching on Steam the same day as well. More than likely, most eyes are going to be on Black Myth Wukong in terms of streaming, in terms of content creation. It's going to be on this game and not Concord. And that's a real shame. So I say watch this space. When the beta comes out and the reviews start coming out, the impressions start coming out for the beta, we'll soon see how that fares. I just realized my button's undone, so that's very professional, isn't it? But right now, I hope it's great, and I hope Firewalk, this, regardless of what happens with Concord, if it does go tits up, so to speak, hopefully this doesn't affect them and we see more good things from them in the future. But I really hope studios and publishers learn that the live service model just really needs to die. Just let it go.